Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for another show of Life Goes On. My name is Carrie and this is brought to you by the Senior Community Service Employment Program, helping those 55 and older to find meaningful training and employment opportunities. Today's special guest is Maisie Blaine. And Maisie, thank you for coming.
Good morning.
The weather's not exactly the best to be here, but we both made it safe. Can you just tell me a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I work for the Office of Ombudsman for long-term care.
Say that slower.
I work for the Office of Ombudsman.
Ombudsman.
Yes,
Okay.
Ombudsman for long-term care. And I actually work for the Minnesota Board on Aging, which is kind of under the umbrella of the Department of Human Services in the state of Minnesota. So we work to basically advocate for seniors and those living in long-term care in our communities.
Okay. Can you give a little bit of history about the Ombudsman? A lot of people don't know what that is.
Sure.
And honestly, I didn't know what it was until about a year ago myself either. So
Right.
if you can explain a little bit about the history and maybe how it got its name, because
Right.
that's not an easy word to pronounce.
Right. We actually get that question a lot. So the word ombudsman, as I understand it, is a Swedish word that means client advocate. And so in the state of Minnesota, actually in the country, the Office of Ombudsman for Long-Term Care, the program itself is administered by the Older Americans Act. And so the history dates back to 1987, basically conditions in nursing homes, and at that time, primarily nursing homes, not assisted living, but the conditions in those facilities were not optimal or ideal. And so there was federal legislation passed to allocate monies basically to have advocacy programs in every state across the nation to support those living and receiving long-term care.
Okay. That's a really good, because it's, like I said, so many people don't know
Right.
what it is. I've heard you speak a couple of times, but it's kind of a really big thing to grasp overall what it is.
Right.
So what are some of the services that you provide?
You bet. So I actually cover 5 counties in northeastern Minnesota. I cover Itasca, Koochiching, Lake, Cook, and northern and southern St. Louis. And so in covering all of those counties, it's a lot of geographical territory.
Yes, it is.
And it's a lot of care facilities. So we cover facilities that encompass long-term care, including nursing homes, facilities that are licensed as skilled nursing facilities, assisted livings, people receiving home care in their home, people receiving home care through an agency in their home, or people in the hospital under Medicare services. So we kind of have a really large population that we serve. The primary focus of our job is to advocate to ensure people's rights are protected in those settings. And so we might get calls anywhere from, an issue related to billing. When you moved into the facility, you understood that your bill was going to, let's say, be $3,500 a month, and then your first bill arrives and it's $5,400, and you're not clear about how or why that is. We want to make sure that when you moved in, that those service charges and fees were communicated to you in a clear and understandable language, which is a right people receiving long-term care have. We might get calls related to substandard care, call light wait times being in excess of however many minutes, not getting appropriate diets if you maybe are on a diabetic diet or a cardiac diet and the facility isn't honoring those doctor's orders. So it really kind of encompasses a large range of things. The first question I always ask people when they call me is, have you talked to the care facility, or have you talked to the home care provider, or have you talked to the hospital about your concern? Every facility has to have a grievance policy and procedure, and they have to respond to consumers' complaints and concerns. And so there are various reasons that maybe a facility doesn't follow through or hasn't followed through, or maybe the consumer's nervous or scared and they haven't spoken up. So the first thing I always ask is, have you talked to the provider? If so, what have they done to alleviate your concerns? What are your continuing concerns? If not, what is your hesitation? Are you fearful of retaliation? Are you worried about how they'll respond or take you seriously? And so we kind of walk through that process. And so I might triage a phone call and just give advocacy advice to someone. Hey, this is how I might talk to the administrator, or how I might talk to the social worker. If you run into trouble, call me back. And perhaps by the time they get to me, they've exhausted those options and they want me to step in and kind of mediate the situation.
Okay, is there an age limit of the people that you work with on this?
You know, not really. We used to be called the Office of Ombudsman for Older Americans. And so there came a point, though, when kind of disability services expanded and people living in the community expanded, that long-term care really meant more than just seniors. And so they're often, the populations that we serve are seniors. Often those folks are age 55 and older. But if someone is receiving long-term care in the community and is younger, we also might serve them. There's actually an Office of Ombudsman for mental health and developmental disabilities as well. So if anyone's primary diagnoses falls under those categories, or their consumer complaint is related to those categories, then that office would probably be better able to serve them, and we would make that referral. But we do work with folks sometimes who are younger and receiving long-term care services, maybe related to a physical disability or a cognitive impairment of some kind.
Okay, can you give me kind of some of the examples, maybe, I know it's confidentiality, but can you come up with an example that would be kind of true to life that people would have called you for? Just a couple of them so our viewers can kind of get an idea of, this is something that's going on in my life, would it qualify?
Right.
You know, what kind of help would you be able to give and advice in those situations?
Right. So one of the big things that we've been getting a lot of calls on recently is the right to return to a care facility after you've maybe had a hospital stay or some sort of significant change in status. And so the different settings are differently governed depending on the regulation of the setting. And so, for example, I got a call yesterday about an individual in the hospital. They were transferred to the hospital for an episode of physical illness that they needed treatment for. They were admitted to the hospital, stayed a couple of days, are now kind of back at their baseline status and ready to return to the care facility. And sometimes, for differing reasons, we get a little hesitation from a care facility to take that person back to the care center. Those rules look a little different depending on whether it's a nursing home or an assisted living, but people have the right to be given a involuntary termination of service notice, or an eviction notice. In the case of an assisted living, it would be both a service termination and a lease termination notice. So we look to make sure, were those notices given, was the time frame appropriate, did they follow the regulations? We can assist to advocate to get folks back to their facility, or in certain cases where the facilities are continuing to not want to take them back from the hospital for whatever reason. Maybe their level of care is too high, maybe there's some behavioral issues, maybe they're concerned about safety of the patient. Then we work with them to kind of figure out some alternatives. And sometimes we have to make referrals to the Department of Health, who is kind of that regulatory authority. That's another question I sometimes get asked, is what is the difference between an ombudsman and the health department, who licenses and oversees these facilities from a regulatory standpoint. And our missions are similar. We both want for people in every setting to get the highest possible quality of care, and we want the federal and state regulations to be followed. My role, though, is that of an advocacy nature and a problem-solving nature. Let's get this fixed so that the consumer can get what they need, where the Department of Health is regulatory in nature, where it's kind of the imposition of fines and citations revolving around not meeting those regulatory requirements.
Okay. So a lot of what you've talked about has actually been dealing with hospitals, assisted living, nursing homes, those kinds of settings. Right. What about more the private home?
Sure.
So someone who's trying to stay home, what kinds of help can you give that person, and what kind of examples of situations have you seen from people who are trying to stay home? You know, what kind of help do they need that they come to you for?
You bet. So I would say, as you know, as people are getting older and as the cost of care is really skyrocketing across the country, people are electing and choosing to stay in their homes as long as they possibly can. Most people want to do that. They want to optimize their living situation. I would say the biggest challenge, especially in rural Minnesota, is, and the thing that I get the most calls about on the home care side, is finding adequate numbers of staff to staff the needs of the consumers. So we have a lot of people who want to continue to live in their homes, who maybe secure a home care agency, and that home care agency, let's say, comes in a couple days a week to help with daily care, showering, transfers, preparation of meals, whatever those services are. And one of the things we run into is consistency in staffing, getting kind of the same people there on a regular basis, reliability of staffing, making sure that people are actually going to show up on a Tuesday when they say they're going to show up. The home care rights govern that every home care agency has to have a contingency plan. So in the event of an illness, an accident, an injury where the home care agency can't get in and provide their service on a given day, they have to have a backup plan. And those are written up in the contract at the time of committing to service. So sometimes that's another home care agency. If home care agency A can't make it, then the plan is to call home care agency B, and they'll maybe send someone out. But often it falls on the onus of family members, and so they're the contingency, maybe a spouse, maybe a daughter, maybe a grandchild. And so that poses some challenges when the support systems for an elder person or a disabled person or someone receiving services in their home have those supports that maybe work a full-time job or a part-time job even, or just get that call at 5 o'clock in the morning that they have to be there at 8 to help with something. So that is a challenge. I think across all the long-term care settings, what myself and colleagues and people in the long-term care industry have seen is a huge need for staffing. We need people to come into long-term care and stay in long-term care. And there was some recent legislation passed to kind of increase rates for certain care types and settings to help with that, to kind of help with the recruitment and the retention of staff, so that we can, facilities can provide scholarships maybe to send nursing assistants to nursing school or help with those types of things to keep people in the industry. Because as the population ages, we need more and more caregivers, and we really are lacking them right now.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of my next questions I was going through. CSEP is, like I said, for those 55 and older, people who are trying to get back on their feet. That age, even in my family, is oftentimes a caregiver for an aging parent.
Right.
So say I'm in that age group, I'm trying to find a job, trying to find some help for me. I'm a caregiver, but I need to be able to support myself, my house, all my utility bills, those kinds of things. And I have this aging parent that is just needs more care than what I can give. So as a caregiver, I can call you, right? So it's not that person directly. A caregiver can go ahead and call you.
Right.
Can you talk about kind of what the process is of just someone who's brand new talking to you in that kind of a situation? What kind of advice, what kind of help can you offer them?
Sure. So if someone were to contact me in that kind of a situation, our role as advocates, number one, is to find out what the consumer wants. So what does your loved one want? Do they want to maintain staying in their home? And how can we link people up to maybe the senior linkage line? Or can we link people up to providers in the community? My role would be ensuring that if there's a home care agency involved, that they're following and fulfilling their obligations, that they're doing what they say they're going to do, and then kind of working you through how to be a good advocate for your loved one. We can refer people to supportive services that can support them in that caregiving capacity. But one of the other things that we do is we have a voice in kind of informing legislation. So one of the things you just talked about is, the challenge of a family caregiver is making sure that not only can you, maybe provide for your own family, but that you can kind of free yourself up. There are some new pieces of legislation, and of course I don't have them in front of me, but there are a number of pieces of legislation that have been recently introduced to talk about, tax credits for supporting people who are family caregivers, spouses, children, things like that. And so I think, as we, in our role kind of as systemic advocates, we always are trying to have a voice and have a direct line to those legislators to say, hey, this is how we need to make sure we're protecting seniors and caregivers and people with disabilities in the new legislation. But watching for those things, I think we're going to see more and more of those in the future, in a way to really, keep people in their homes as long as they can. Number one, because people want to be there, but number two, it costs a lot of money to care for people in long-term care settings, nursing homes and assisted livings. And so when people exhaust their resources and they turn to state programs like medical assistance, then that has an impact on government and finances and what it costs. So, the push in the state of Minnesota is to try to keep people in their homes, encourage people to plan ahead for their future so that they have a realistic idea of what long-term care is going to cost, and most people don't. It's very expensive, and those resources get exhausted awfully quickly.
It does. So if someone is in this situation, has never talked to you, doesn't know much about you and about the services a whole lot, but they're afraid that maybe it's going to take too much time working with you, that they're not going to see a turnaround fast enough to be of help, or that maybe they're afraid of any kind of cost that might be involved in working with you.
Sure.
Is there any kind of cost in working with
that's
you?
a great question. No, we are a free program. The program is funded by the Older Americans Act. We're very fortunate in the state of Minnesota that in addition to the federal dollars that are funneled to our program, we actually get some state dollars that kick in. And so we have, I believe at this time, about 14 or so ombudsmen in the state of Minnesota serving both regionally and in the metro area, as well as a deputy and a state ombudsman. And so no cost involved. It's a free service. It's confidential, so people can call us and they can either request our assistance or just bounce off of us as a listening ear what their struggles are. If someone calls me and is really concerned, for example, about the staffing conditions at their nursing home, I don't have to take any action if they don't want me to. They can just call and say, these are the things I'm frustrated by. And we can handle their specific individual concern, or we can look at it on a larger systemic level. Is there something particular happening at that nursing home that we need to address? Or we can do nothing. If they elect to do nothing, it goes no further than the fact that they just simply, I lent them a listening ear. And that does happen at times. So we want to be an advocacy organization to make sure that people's rights are honored, to make sure those regulations are followed, but we don't want people to have the impact of worrying about cost or what time-consuming nature. Right. And some of our problems are handled really quickly. Someone might call about a diet issue they're having, maybe their dietary needs aren't being met. We make a phone call to the dietitian at the care facility with the permission of the client, and we get it wrapped up and it's fixed within a few days. We have other cases where maybe someone wants to get to a less restrictive setting and they feel like a family member or a care facility is impeding their ability to do that. And sometimes that takes a little more triaging, maybe working with a guardian or working with the county entity, a case manager, someone of that caliber, and then making sure that follow through is there. So in addition to the oversight of the facilities, we're also doing oversight to make sure that guardians are fulfilling their responsibilities to consumers, that county case managers and care coordinators are fulfilling their obligations to consumers. So there's really a lot of regulations involved in long-term care.
Okay, so you work with all kinds of people, and we're coming close to the end of our show for today. So You've mentioned so many good bits of information. Do you have anything in particular that you want to really stress, something that you're really passionate about, that you really want to have our viewers really be able to understand from you?
I think the most important thing I would say is that if you are considering long-term care, going into long-term care, really do a lot of research, understand what you're getting yourself into in terms of contracts and obligations. And then I would say to make sure that people understand that they have rights. When you enter a care facility, a long-term care facility in the state of Minnesota, you don't lose rights, you gain rights. You gain rights, and that's in an effort to kind of balance the imbalance of power that's there, and that basically if anyone needs to get a hold of our office, that they could call our 1-800 number. Can I leave that?
You can leave that, and it will be on the screen at the end of the show too.
Perfect. So I won't worry about it, but making sure that they can call always our central office, 1-800 number, to get a hold of us if they have any concerns or questions or just inquiries about long-term care in general.
Okay. So what I thought that came to mind is we were talking about the senior linkage line.
Yeah.
but you've also mentioned that your referrals. So if somebody comes across, say, your phone number and calls you, and they're new to all this. You know, they're not sure what's going on, where to even start,
Right.
but it's not over a particular problem in a certain kind of a setting that they feel is taking away their rights.
Right.
What kind of help can you give
We're
to
gonna
them?
get them to the right place, and so we're really fortunate that we have a lot of services in the state of Minnesota, and we have a lot of agencies that are working to help people, and the system's hard to navigate. So we're gonna get them to the right place. If they're looking for care options, we're gonna link them up and talk to them about how to get a long-term care consultation and see what's available to them. If they're interested in housing or facility options, we can get them to someone who can help with that. So just depending if they have questions about medical assistance and the application, we're gonna talk them through that process and about what that looks like and get them to the right agency to help. So if we're gonna make sure if we're not the person that can help them, we're gonna talk them through it and we're gonna get them to where they can get the help they need. Yeah.
So they'll get the referral to be able to start their journey on this one.
It's confusing, and there's no manual. There's no manual for how to help an elder or help yourself seek out long-term care, and so we are really passionate about making sure that people kind of have a little hand-holding through that process.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you personally work with 5 different counties.
Yeah.
Do you have offices in those counties that if someone wants to meet in a private, confidential spot that they can come to you?
Absolutely. So my office is located out of Grand Rapids for the region that I serve. The offices in Greater Minnesota, there are some community offices and some home offices, but most of what we do is out in the care facilities. So if someone is in a care facility or receiving services, we can come to them, which is really the beauty of our program and one thing that we offer that a lot don't. So, but absolutely, if someone needs to meet with us, whether it's in a community office or whether it's in a coffee shop or in their home, we're happy to make arrangements to sit down and talk with folks.
Awesome. So any last comments as we get ready to wrap up the show?
I don't think so. Just if anybody has any questions, they're free to contact us, and happy to be able to get the word out about our program.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great
thank you.
conversation, and so please feel free at any time if you are watching this and you feel that it matches what you're going through, go ahead and give Maisie a call. Do you have maybe a website that people can go to for more information maybe?
Sure. The Minnesota Board on Aging is probably the best. If people just Google Minnesota Board on Aging, I can't rattle it off the top of my head. It might be www.mnaging.org, but Minnesota Board on Aging has a link to our information about our program.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just a little bit of good information to know. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for another show of Life Goes On, brought to you by CSEP, the Senior Community Service Employment Program. It's helping those 55 and older to find meaningful training and employment opportunities. I actually cover the exact same territory as you do, so I know all about the whole rural area and going all over the place. It makes it fun, but CSEP is currently taking enrollments and looking to add on new participants coming about April. We always look for our vets first, so if you're a veteran and you're in a situation and need a little extra help, go ahead and give me a call and I'll see what I can do for you. Just one last note though, that Itasca County is currently full, so thank you and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.